Greetings, friends. My name is Pavlo and now we will dive into the top news of this day. Russia's creeping offensive on the Ukrainian front line is becoming more and more difficult. Plans to occupy at least the entire Donetsk and Luhansk regions are failing, and colossal losses reduce the capabilities and reduce the potential of entire Russian army. So now time is on the Ukrainian side, so we can have best preparation for a counterattack. This was stated by the Minister of Defence of Ukraine, Alexei Reznikov, in an interview with the Elta news agency.
Time is key for us in preparing for a counterattack. What is more, it is working in our favor because, as we can see, the further we go, the more the centrifugal processes within the Russian regime are accelerating. Alexei Reznikov, Minister of Defence of Ukraine, in an interview with the Elta news agency.
According to Ukrainian intelligence, the leadership of the Russian regime is ready to mobilize and sacrifice even 3 million people. Many senior Kremlin officials back up their strategic calculations and planning with the following logic. We will not regret 1 or 3 million, because due to those losses, we will annex half of Ukraine with 20 million and thus compensate for these losses. At the same time, Reznikov rejected criticism regarding the categorical intention of the military political leadership of Ukraine to continue the defense of Bakhmut. It is alike Ukrainian army is suffering losses there that could undermine Ukraine's ability to launch a counterattack. The minister claims that Russian losses there are disproportionately greater and simply colossal. What can we talk about if since the beginning of 2023 Russia has already lost almost 80,000 people, while in 10 months of the previous year it was 100,000. According to the minister, in Bakhmut alone, Russia loses about 500 soldiers killed and wounded every day. And the question is that if the Ukrainian troops leave Bakhmut, then the next line of defense will be under the same fire, near Sovyansk, Chasiv Yar or other cities of Donbass. Let me remind you that the first attacks on Bakhmut were in May last year. That is, the Russians have been trying to capture one city for almost a year. In this case, the tactics of creeping offensive are used. This means that if not for those losses, then they could use all their potential on another defensive line or on the front line against us.
The time is now on our and our partners' side. We still need time to prepare, to master new systems, to train our units. I think the issue of supply of fourth-generation jets will be solved and we will receive F-16 or other aircraft. We need aviation as an element of air defense, and this is vital. To sum up, it may be said that Bakhmut is a place where we are winning time for all of that, and we are also weakening the capabilities of Russians. Alexei Reznikov, Minister of Defense of Ukraine, in an interview with the Elta news agency.
Russians learn and learn very quickly. As a result, the tactics of warfare are also changing. When they openly invaded Ukraine on February 24th last year, they marched forward in columns, without artillery cover, reconnaissance, without fear of anything. And they also carried their parade dress uniforms with them, thinking that in 3 days they would parade through the center of Kiev. It cost them a lot. We broke these columns, cut their supply chains.
At the very start, the regular army took the heaviest blow and withstood it. Those people who had been in the army before and had the relevant experience, they were joined by veterans from the beginning of the Russian and Ukrainian war, those who had served and fought since 2014. It was primarily those who had already served and fought who withstood the first waves of the invasion. But now, naturally, the country's defense and security forces are filling up with people who need to be trained at first. We are very grateful to our allies and partners who are also helping us in this very important area through various training programs intended for our troops. Alexei Reznikov, Minister of Defense of Ukraine, in an interview with the Elta news agency.
Our soldiers are trained to use air defense systems, artillery, tanks and other armored vehicles. The military undergoes both individual and collective training, starting with the battalion level. At present, particular importance is being attached to the training of those subunits that will take part in the counterattack. Over the past year, our army has made a huge step towards creative thinking, freedom of decision-making, which is provided to everyone from a sergeant to a company and battalion commander. Thus, completely different internal relations and culture began to form in the Ukrainian army. In addition, over these 8 years, we have already come close to many NATO standards. and the experience of mastering many different weapons from different countries of the world also contributed. So although the basis of the weapons continues to be old Soviet weapons, we also use modern weapons from NATO countries. We combine all this so creatively and quickly that even our instructors in the West are glad that we come to them, because we give them valuable experience too.
It was believed that a small Soviet army would fight against a large Soviet army. If that was the case, the small Soviet army was doomed to lose to the big Soviet army. But the key thing is that we are no longer a small Soviet army, just as we are not a Soviet country at all. Yes, we still have a lot of Soviet legacy and burden, and we certainly have not done all that we could and should have done over the last 30 years in getting rid of it and fighting corruption. But democracy has managed to prevail and settled in Ukraine, and democratic and European values are already our own. Alexei Reznikov, Minister of Defence of Ukraine, in an interview with the ILTA news agency.
At the same time, it is very important now to keep a balance between good and bad news. After all, only good news will lead to the fact that there will be high expectations, which in case of failure will lead to fatigue. Although now, according to Reznikov, the danger of fatigue is less than, for example, last summer. Therefore, the American military leadership is also trying not to arouse inflated expectations. Otherwise, it will be followed by the same strong disappointment, including the American society. They help us a lot, but if something suddenly goes wrong, there will be no reproaches that they didn't it in vain. Indeed, according to Reznikov, the Ukrainian leadership adheres to a firm position that there can be no negotiations with the current leadership of Russia while its troops are on the territory of Ukraine. In addition, dialogue with criminals is impossible too.
What about the tragedy we have suffered, losses and casualties we experienced? Everyone saw the horrors that Russian brought not only to Bucha, Irpin, Hostomel, Izium, Kupiansk, Kherson and Mariupol. We cannot just sit down at the table and discuss something with them. Whom to talk with? Murderers, robbers, marauders and rapists, child kidnappers. This is a simple impossible. On the other hand, we have demonstrated to the entire world that we can fight successfully. A claim that the Russian army is the second best in the world is a bluff, and we have proved that. Yes, there are plenty of them and they have many weapons, but the quality is low. Alexei Reznikov, Minister of Defence of Ukraine, in an interview with the ILTA news agency.
According to the minister, this war cannot be frozen at all by any negotiations, because this is a global crash. Nevertheless, the counteroffensive, according to the Ukrainian Minister of Defense, will definitely take place at the right moment. And now I want to talk about spies. Well, not spies, but secret information that becomes public. For several days now, the world media has been discussing the classified documents of the Pentagon which got into social networks. Where this information came from, how much of it got into the public space, American intelligence and law enforcement will now find out, so we will expect information from them. I would still like to talk about the consequences of this leak. There are actually several of them, and not all of them are as obvious as it might seem. The first and most obvious: in the American Pentagon, not everything is so good with data security, and let their security service deal with it. The main thing is that the leak of documents will in no way prevent the USA from providing the Ukrainian side with all kinds of necessary assistance. This was stated by Deputy Spokesman of the US State Department, Vedant Patel. And this is the second important consequence. The third is probably the main one. The USA has practically unlimited access to secret information of the Russian Federation, and the attempts of the Russian authorities and propaganda to present the leak of American secret documents as evidence of a victory of Russia in the American intelligence elites and to position the scandal as UkrLeaks is a clumsy attempt to divert attention from the main thing. Perhaps the real purpose of the leak was precisely this: to show the whole world that the Kremlin is under the hood of the Pentagon. After all, the published information does not provide any fundamentally new information capable of influencing the situation on the battlefield. One way or another, American cooperation with Ukraine was known, as were the problems of the Ukrainian army. Although, as a result of this leak, our military command still had to change some of its plans, CNN wrote, citing its sources.
I don't know who they talked to at CNN. In any case, I can say that the number of people who know about our plans in our territory is extremely limited, and I don't think that the whistleblower who was in contact with CNN had anything to do with it. Alexei Danilov, Secretary of the National Security Council of Ukraine.
At the same time, the level of corruption of Russian persons who have access to classified information poses a threat to the national security of Russia itself. And that is why Russian propagandists and officials are so interested in the distribution and discussion of published information. After all, the failure of the Blitzkrieg in February 2022, the successful attack of the Ukrainian army in the Kharkiv region, the Russian escape from Kherson, the inability to take Bakhmut and advance in Donetsk region can be explained by this kind of awareness.
The purpose of leaks of supposedly secret data is obvious: to divert the attention from the actual preparation for the next stage of the war, to sow certain doubts and mutual suspicions between partners. Are there leaks, and if there is, from where? And shouldn't the volume of confidential communication be reduced to make divisions into certain internal preparatory processes? Mikhail Podolyak, advisor to the head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, on Telegram.
Of course, the leak could potentially cause real damage to Ukraine's military efforts if it helps Moscow block sources of information. It has already complicated relations with allied countries and raised doubts about the US ability to keep its secrets, the New York Times notes. However, in private conversations with journalists, employees of several agencies responsible for national security admitted both that the authorities are in a hurry to find the source of the leak and fears that there will be more leaked documents. However, it cannot be ruled out that such secret documents can be drawn up in the Kremlin. There they have been able to forge evidence and documents for a very long time, although not very successfully.
In recent decades, the most successful operation of the Russian special services took place in Photoshop. From the preliminary analysis of these materials, we see false figures on losses from both sides. Some of the information is clearly collected from open sources. Andriy Yusov, representative of the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defence of Ukraine.
The leaks do not specify specific plans. For example, how, when, and where Ukraine intends to launch its counteroffensive. However, photos of schedules of arms deliveries or troop numbers look authentic, the New York Times claims. All the more so because these materials confirm the idea voiced by intelligence representatives. The US has a clearer idea of Russian military operations than of Ukrainian plans, writes the New York Times. The leaked documents demoralized the Russian public. The information that appeared caused panic in Russia about the inevitability of the disaster that awaits them, the Institute for the Study of War writes in its report. After all, as the Washington Post writes, according to one of the documents, American intelligence knew about the transmission by the Russian Ministry of Defense of a plan to strike the positions of Ukrainian troops in two places on a specific day in February. They also knew in advance that the military was preparing strikes on a dozen energy facilities and as many bridges in Ukraine. And after that, it would be appropriate to shoot out all of them. Shoigu, Gerasimov, Prigozhin. But let's hope that this will not happen. Let them steal further, and the US intelligence penetrates their ranks more strongly. Everything is for the benefit of Ukraine. I note that the documents appeared on the network more than a month ago, but it became known about them only now. So someone definitely needs it, and we will soon find out exactly who and why. That concludes our today's video. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for future videos. Goodbye.